Hello and welcome to Teal Blue, your fortnightly cybersecurity podcast focused on Australian cybersecurity news for Australian organisations. My name's Brad Morgan. I'm the Triskel Labs Security Operations Centre Manager, and as always today, I'm joined by Richard Granger, the Triskel Labs Global DFIR Lead. Rich, we're back after a few weeks off for end of financial year. I hope you enjoyed the break.
I did. Now back to it.
That's it. I know you've been busy all the way through as of Vice, but it's nice to be back and recording. So, mate, can you walk us through what we're looking at today?
Yeah, so we've got a couple of different topics to talk through today. Some of them are quite well related as well, which feed into each other. But we're going to be talking about the new Australian cybersecurity bill, which is attempting to mandate ransomware reporting. Which I think is going to be an interesting topic to discuss. Next up, after that, we've got the rising costs of data breaches based on an IBM and Rubrik report. We'll also be talking about an ESET survey, which discusses how Australian small to medium businesses and their willingness to pay ransomware criminals.
I'm seeing a theme here.
Sorry?
I'm seeing a theme.
Yes. Well, and it continues because the next one is a report issued by Orange Cyber Defence, talking about cyber extortion being up 61% in Australia over the past year. And then we'll be talking about how phishing attacks are adapting to current events. So I'm looking forward to discuss that one. We obviously didn't have a recording after the Friday events of CrowdStrike, so we'll
Friday.
We'll get a chance to talk about it in that section. And then finally, instead of having vulnerability of the week, we're actually going to talk about Qualis's 2024 Midyear threat landscape review and have a bit of discussion around that as well.
Yeah, excellent. I'm really excited to touch on all of those. I think we've it's hand in hand with some of the reason we've been so busy is just how busy you've been in the DFIR practice and how busy I've been with the SOC team on the SOC side of things. And I think a lot of these lead into that and they demonstrate just how busy we are and, driving a lot of the improvement and a lot of the things that we're doing with newer clients to improve their security. Let's jump into the first one, and this is the Australian government is expected to be introducing new legislation requiring mandatory reporting of ransomware attacks. The bill aims to enhance transparency and improve national cybersecurity posture by ensuring timely and accurate reporting of cyber incidents. Mate, this is pretty much what you deal with. It's your bread and butter. I'd love to see what you think of this one.
Yeah, so obviously we deal with quite a bit of ransomware in the DFIR team. And at the moment, there's no real sort of obligation to report whether you've actually paid a threat actor after you've been a victim of a ransomware attack. Obviously, there are some obligations that are there, such as notifying the privacy commissioner and impact individuals as well. But in terms of actually paying a threat actor, there's no real legislation sort of making you or mandating you to do that. So that's kind of what the government's looking to do here. They're looking to basically make it mandated. And the proposed bill will essentially require organizations to report a ransomware attack. Which essentially is the thought process behind that is you can get some better data on the frequency and the impact of the attacks that are impacting Australian organisations, and they are also aiming to improve the transparency and accountability of organisations as well, which they say will be able to help build a more comprehensive picture of the ransomware threat landscape. And there has been some discussions as well around the impact on businesses with this potential new mandate as well. And the legislation may increase the compliance burden on businesses, especially those smaller organizations who basically need to make sure that they have the necessary systems and processes in place to meet the reporting requirements.
I agree, but I think on that one, let's be honest, it's 2024. If a business doesn't have cyber insurance, they're probably in a position where they need to be looking at it. And if the worst should happen, cyber insurance is going to help them help guide them through that process from the legal point of view, from the recovery point of view, and all of that sort of thing. So I kind of think that there's an impact there, maybe in the cost of taking that insurance out. But even if an organization is determined by insurers as uninsurable, they're going to tell them what they need to do to at least get to a point where they can be insured. And once that's in place, they're able to start getting that advice from those organizations should the worst happen and they're affected by ransomware. At least that's my view from the outside. Have you seen that sort of thing happen?
Yeah. So like we obviously work with a large number of insurers, and essentially, if you have an insurance policy and you do have a ransomware event, and obviously talk to your broker. I'm not an insurance specialist to validate this, but essentially you will get coverage for what's required to assist you with the incident. So that's going to include and insurance carriers have panels of trusted vendors who they can bring in. So you might get DFIR to come in and do the investigation, find out what happened, what data was accessed, what data was exfiltrated, and basically be able to paint you a picture of what happened from that aspect. But you also have legal advice as well, and they're going to be able to guide an organization on what are their legal obligations to respond to this this particular incident, which may be, notifying impact individuals who had their data exfiltrated as part of the attack. It'll also be sort of notification for the privacy commissioner as well. So I think it's definitely, I don't see too much changing for insured victims for ransomware attacks. I think I sort of mentioned it before, that this is going to be a big burden on uninsured small to medium businesses who might not necessarily want to or be able to afford the response costs for a ransomware attack, because they're not cheap to be able to respond to this in all the parties. I mean, I've just mentioned forensics and legal, but depending on the incident, you might also need crisis communications. There's a whole sort of other variety of different parties that you might need to bring in. So I feel like I'm not sure whether it'll sort of. It's going to be interesting to see how this mandate could potentially impact those smaller organizations who suffer these kinds of attacks as well.
Yeah, and I think that if there is this sort of mandate introduced, I think the government does need to be able to offer a support structure for those smaller organisations. And I know that they are doing their best through ACSC at the moment and places like that. And I'd love to see that being further developed and growing for, as you say, those small and medium businesses that can't necessarily either afford to have cyber insurance, or the cyber insurers aren't going to be willing to take them on because let's be honest, we've got to be getting to that point at some point in the future too, right? Like they can't just keep insuring everyone with what we're seeing out in the wild.
I think there's also a bit of a, I don't know, maybe misconception among a lot of businesses in Australia about what you actually get with insurance, cyber insurance specifically. Like I've sort of used this story a bit where I actually did a presentation with a client that we worked with as part of a ransomware response. And she told the story about how, when she first thought that she had cyber insurance and they had an incident, it'd be like, home and contents. You call them up and they'd be like, yeah, I've had a leak in the roof. And then someone comes out and goes, yep, your roof's leaking. And we'll be back in a week to fix it. She just didn't understand what was included in it. And, the fact that after, I think it was like half an hour of them notifying the insurer, everyone was on a call. We were on a call. Legal was on a call. And all these parties essentially here to help recover and understand what had happened. And she found that out through having to go through the incident, unfortunately, not sort of knowing upfront what was included in it.
Yeah, and I think it's valid on the flip side as well, that if you don't take the appropriate action and don't loop your insurer in soon enough, there can be other complications as well that people need to be aware of. So,
absolutely, we can talk about that for hours.
we can. Let's not. But I
Yes.
think this is something that's going to be critically important for people to be aware of, especially if you are one of those out there that is uninsured or underinsured. I think you need to be aware of this, because at least if you are insured and the worst happens, you're going to have the legal team there telling you that guiding you through the process of what you need to be doing.
Yeah.
Cool. And again, we are not legal professionals. Please seek your own advice on that sort of thing as well.
Yes.
So, okay. So, look, leading out of that, and again, this comes into line with a lot of the insurance side of things as well, is the rising cost of data breaches within Australia. And this is a couple of links in this one from IBM and from Rubrik. So with this one, IBM's 2024 cost of data breach report reveals that the average cost of a data breach within Australia has reached a record high. Rubrik's research highlights that data breaches were 50% more common in Australia than the global average in 2023. So you take those two things combined there, we've got 50% more common for data breaches, and the cost of a data breach in Australia has reached record highs. Like, it's painting a pretty bleak picture out there at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, again, your bread and butter still.
Yes.
What's your thoughts on this one with what you're seeing? Because obviously I know you do get to see some of the ransom demands and the impact and what it's costing organizations to recover, whether they choose to pay or not. And I think you can share some absolutely amazing insight on this one.
Yeah, so within the reports, I guess the sort of takeaways that they've sort of concluded is data breaches in Australia are now more costly than ever, with the sort of average breach costs reaching new heights, which is basically sort of highlighting the financial impact of cyber incidents. I think in IBM's report, they said that the average cost of a data breach in Australia has reached a record high of 4.26 million, which is a 27% increase since 2020. So
that's huge. That is absolutely massive.
Yeah, it's like we do a lot of work with small and medium businesses. We do a lot of enterprise as well. Obviously, we only see a very small part of the overall financial impact in terms of the DFIR services and things like that we do. But I mean, some of these incidents, depending on the data that's taken, they can go on for ages. You might have to do e-discovery across things, which is an expensive and time-consuming, but often a necessary thing you need to do to get a real solid understanding of what data was impacted. So, and then we spoke before about the different parties that can be involved in helping facilitate and the organization work through the response as well. So, I mean, I can see, the cost of these things increasing. And
I think in that they're also taking in loss of business as well. So,
absolutely.
If a business is offline for a couple of days, depending on the scale, they could be losing millions of dollars a day as well. So that does add into that. Yeah,
business interruption is definitely a significant cost as well. We don't really sort of deal with that too much from our side of things, but I mean, we're just from conversations we've had with clients, working through the ransomware attack, like they've thrown out figures of what their impact is in terms of business interruption, and it can be hundreds of thousands of dollars a day that the systems are down, and obviously that can add up very quickly.
Definitely. Yep. So they also called out the frequency of breaches as well. So they're saying that the frequency of breaches is at a higher rate than the global average?
Yeah, I can see that. I do feel overall Australia's sort of security maturity is quite low compared to some other parts of the world. Obviously, that's why we've got a large focus on cybersecurity now as a nation. Obviously, trying to achieve the sort of guidelines and the everything for 2030 for reaching a certain security posture. But I guess sort of what we're seeing on the front line is, yes, Australian organisations definitely are experiencing a large volume of data breaches, and that's not just ransomware, that's business email compromise. I think at the moment we're actually doing more business email compromise investigations than ransomware and other incidents, just because of the frequency and how successful it can be. I mean, with ransomware, you might see threat actors in environments for a couple of weeks, doing their digging around, finding out how everything works. But for a business email compromise, the threat actor might spend a day, having a look through, finding the right target for a invoice redirection, and then walk away with 250 grand for not a lot of like hours of work, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, and we see the amount of damage that they can have in an environment within the first 10 to 15 minutes of a BEC. We see that frequently. And one of the things I want to call out there, the IBM report, the initial attack vectors that they called out was phishing was the most common initial attack vector, followed by stolen or compromised credentials, both of which most commonly that we see within the SOC leading to these BEC events. So definitely not surprised that you guys are dealing with a lot of that, and definitely not surprised to see the figures that they're throwing out there, because I mean, I've seen a couple over my time that have been pushing near on half of what these figures that they're quoting are, and that's just what we've seen. So we haven't seen some of the really big ones out there.
Yeah.
Awesome. Look, I think on the back end of that, I think there's, I mean, yeah. Well, in your view, is there anything more we need to cover on that one, or should we just jump down to the next one? I think there's a lot that we can cover, but we've got 4 very similar topics today. All right, look, so the next one is, again, as I said, very well related. Australian SMBs' willingness to pay ransomware criminals. So this one's from ESET. Their survey reveals that 9 out of 10 Australian SMBs are willing to pay ransomware criminals if targeted. This alarming statistic highlights a significant gap in cybersecurity awareness and preparedness among SMBs.
Yep.
Enough said. Move on.
The article for this one. ESET have sort of done they surveyed 1,400 IT professionals within Asia Pacific region, and I guess sort of the takeaways from what they were doing is that, yes, a lot of Australian SMBs, well, the majority of them indicating they would pay a ransom if targeted, and also went into a bit of lack of preparedness as well. So if you're kind of relying on paying a ransom to solve all the problems of what's just happened, that's kind of not really the best way of dealing with it, and you're better off kind of putting some effort into ensuring that your cybersecurity measures and practices are more up to date in the first place. So hopefully you don't have to be put in a position where you might pay the ransom.
I agree. I mean, paying a ransom is never ideal, because as we've seen, you're going to have to report that soon, and I hope that comes in line with what we're seeing in some other larger countries. I think it will go a long way to making us the most secure country in the world by 2030, the way the government is hoping. But yeah, paying a ransom should never be your go-to solution, because there's still no guarantee that you're going to get that data back.
Yeah, it's we get asked by clients a lot around like what our stance is when with paying a ransom. At the end of the day, we support the client in terms of what needs to happen to make sure that they're able to continue operating in a safe and secure manner. There are situations where there is no choice. Essentially, the organization can pay for a decryption tool, or they can lose all their data for the last X amount of years, and essentially we'll probably have to shut up shop and not be able to continue. There are some organizations that perhaps want to also pay for reputation reasons, and there might also be some specific sensitivity around the data that's been exfiltrated as well. They might have backups that they can recover from, but they're looking to pay based on what kind of data was accessed and exfiltrated. In those situations, again, this is why having cyber insurance is really important, is because you'll be able to get legal onto that call, who will be able to guide you into basically the options you have regarding paying the ransom. And if the decision is made that you can legally pay a ransom, because we also need to factor in things like sanctions, which you might find yourself in a position where it's actually illegal for you to pay a ransom. They'll be able to guide an organization through that process, and also engage professionals that do this negotiation every day and can provide you with more information about what that process would look like, what the success is in terms of actually getting a decryption tool and it working, things like that.
Yeah, exactly. So, look, one of the things I want to call out here, and I found this incredibly daunting when I saw it in there, was that while 62% of SMBs express concern about vulnerabilities, and we are going to touch on vulnerabilities later down, only half are using vulnerability and patch management software. So there's two different classes of software there. Like, even if you're just doing vulnerability scanning and you know where your vulnerabilities are, being able to go and fix them is a whole different kettle of fish. But that's a really daunting figure. And Microsoft's just had, we're recording on the 14th of August, so 6 new vulnerabilities added to the CISA KEV list out of the latest round of Patch Tuesday patches. So Microsoft, you should be auto-updating Windows, but all of your third-party platforms, all of that sort of thing, if you're not updating that, even as an SMB, you're asking to get hit. There is no excuse these days not to be patching everything within your environment. It's the growth of vulnerabilities, and again, we'll touch on it later, but that growth of vulnerabilities is just massive.
Yeah. And one specific thing for a lot of sysadmins and things, which a lot of them probably are aware of, and we have had cases where they didn't know, is that when you're running tailored applications on servers, a lot of the time those software packages do not update themselves automatically. It's something you have to do manually. So just making sure that you're keeping on top of that. And that's where things like vulnerability management, come in handy, because you can get an output of all the versions everything's running, whether it's got any vulnerabilities associated with it, and you can sort of track it that way.
The amount of times that our vulnerability team receive feedback from clients going, but we fixed this vulnerability, we've resolved it. Have you restarted the server? Have you actually applied the vulnerability correctly, the patch correctly? They go away and come back, oh yeah, we fixed it. You need to read the KVs, and you need to be resetting or restarting things, power cycling, all that sort of thing. It's besides the point, but it is it's called out for a reason. We see it so often. So
yeah, absolutely.
Let's jump down to another one. So cyber extortion is up by 61%. This is from the guys over at Orange Cyber Defense. And their report says cyber extortion attacks targeting Australian enterprises have increased by 61% over the past year. This rise underscores the growing threat of cyber extortion in the region. I mean, I feel like we can't say a whole lot more, but this one is targeted at enterprise, not at the SMB level. So again, mate, if you can walk us through this one.
Yeah, so I think a couple of the key takeaways from this one is obviously the 61% rise sort of does indicate that there's a bit of an escalation in the frequency and severity of these incidents in Australia. The report does specifically highlight that sectors like healthcare, finance, and critical infrastructure are among the most targeted, which they sort of say is reflective of the attackers' focus on high-value targets. Those stats are actually, fairly in line with what we see in DFIR as well. Like, we do work on a lot of healthcare and finance incidents. I think a lot of it has to do with...
You're up. You go.
I think a lot of it has to do with a lot of the healthcare and finance institutions that we deal with don't necessarily have a large investment put into cybersecurity. So it's more of a, and we say this all the time, it's threat actors targeting low-hanging fruit. So if you have a VPN with no MFA on it, and you can just continually brute force password spray it, that's a good target for a threat actor. Not the fact that they're a healthcare organization, but because they got that VPN with no MFA.
Yeah, and look, it's funny. I look at the percentage of SOC alerts every month that we have, and it's our healthcare and finance are the top two continually. Yeah. Yes, we are skewed toward those. We have a lot more healthcare and finance than critical infrastructure for SAC, but there definitely are two most commonly targeted organization groups, I should say, and and that's not just because they're spending more money. It is because we are seeing a lot more happening, targeting those organizations through phishing, through people knocking on that VPN door, or and other access vectors that we are used to seeing. So it definitely pans out to what we're seeing across DFA and SOC.
Yeah. Another thing that they sort of called out in their report is they're seeing threat actors, increasingly employing double extortion methods. So essentially where data is exfiltrated and then also encrypted. So for those sort of not too familiar with double extortion, that's where a threat actor will essentially exfiltrate that data, and then that's one vector that they can try and elicit pressure on you for releasing that data. A lot of threat actors, or ransomware groups in particular, maintain leak sites on the dark web, where if they are able to exfiltrate data from a victim organization, and that victim organization doesn't negotiate and pay the ransom, they'll post that. And we sort of saw that increasing where organizations were just recovering from backups. So, they get hit by ransomware, they recover from a backup, and then continue on. So that's where the threat actors have sort of evolved a little bit to try and get that additional sort of points that they can try and essentially extort the victim organization with.
Yep. Yeah, it's. I mean, it is incredibly common, isn't it? Right. I'd love to see a stat as to how many ransomware engagements you guys do that have actually had data exfiltration, because I think it would be, pushing 95% from what I've heard over the time. So
yeah, it's definitely the majority. Like, we do occasionally come across smaller ransomware groups or variants where they don't exfiltrate data. They're sort of, smash. That's not really smash and grab, just a smash. Come in, cause havoc, and just hope that the organization doesn't have backups. And sometimes, that does work for them. But the larger groups, it's pretty much all the time that they're exfiltrating data.
Yep. Excellent. So let's move on to the next one, which is phishing attacks are adapting to current events. So this is an interesting report. This was in the Hacker News, and the summary on this one is phishing attacks are increasingly exploiting current events, such as the CrowdStrike outage and global events like the Olympics. This ability makes phishing a persistent and evolving threat to organizations. I mean, I think, calling it a persistent and evolving threat to organizations is pretty adept. I think that it is one of the, and it was supported by one of the other articles up above. It is definitely, if not the primary, one of the primary risks to any organization out there at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. In the articles, they're sort of saying that attackers are more rapidly adapting their campaigns to exploit current events. And I think the one of the examples there that you had was CrowdStrike, where I think you were on a plane when that was all happening.
I was, man. I'm so happy I missed that. I got on the plane in Asia, and it hadn't started yet. I was on the plane about an hour before it started, and I landed once the fix was known and all the client comms had been done, and I missed all the client phone calls. So I feel like I missed out. I feel like I was ripped off a little bit, but also not disappointed.
Yeah. So for those listeners who are not sort of aware of what happened with CrowdStrike, essentially a couple of weeks ago, might have almost been a month now, there was an issue with a certain update to the CrowdStrike Falcon platform, which unfortunately caused blue screen of deaths to a large amount of machines throughout the world. I think Microsoft came out saying it was like 8.5 million or something.
Seems low. It seems really, really low.
Yeah.
I had that chat when they published that. That felt like that was how many were affected on the Monday morning afterward. That was still affected, because that just felt way too low.
Yeah. And essentially,
I'm not going to question Microsoft.
Yeah. Essentially, it caused chaos, as you can expect. I know I wasn't actually in Australia at the time that this happened, but I saw in Slack some of the team were posting blue screen of deaths on checkouts at Woolworths and Coles. So you can imagine just chaos absolutely everywhere. But yeah, I know that I haven't sort of seen it myself, but I know that there have been wide reports of threat actors taking advantage of this and saying, hey, we're from CrowdStrike, we're here to fix this for you, download this, and sort of really exploiting the event to try and gain access to systems. I opened up my bank app and there was a message saying, if anyone pretends to be from CrowdStrike or Microsoft, be very wary. I'm like, okay, this is actually, this is quite widespread. If they're, warning customers about that as well.
Yeah, that's pretty concerning, right? I mean, people still fall for the AnyDesk scams and all that sort of thing. So this was a classic opportunity for those scam call centers and scammers to be able to jump in and try and take advantage. But it just shows that, through phishing as a service, it is so easy to spin one of these campaigns up. It is, they're preloaded, ready to go. The CrowdStrike, no one could have predicted that, but they were so quick to jump onto it. For other things that are planned, like the Olympics, the World Cup, the Football World Cup, Cricket World Cup, any of these sorts of things, it's so easy for them to plan this and get it right, like get a really, really well-refined campaign in place beforehand. In the lead up, trying to sell tickets, scout tickets, even all the way during for trying to get people to download malware and that sort of thing if they're interested in what's happening. I think organizations just need to be aware that it is so common for phishing out there now, and it leads to some of the worst compromises you can think of, because they're able to steal your session tokens, they're able to bypass MFA, they can be so damaging so quickly that organizations need to be aware of that risk. Yeah,
absolutely. And one of the other things mentioned in the article as well is how not only threat actors are sort of using this to current events to adapt, but also they're becoming a bit more sophisticated. So obviously we've got tools like ChatGPT, where they might be able to craft a very well written, perfect English email, and try and get someone to do something based on that email as well. So it's just more tools in their toolbox to be able to try and achieve their objectives.
Definitely. I mean, you think about AI is being baked into everything we use, right? Everyone's selling everything. It's AI powered, AI this, AI that. If you're not sitting in your chair thinking, aren't the threat actors embedding AI into their platforms? They are, right? That it's easy. As easy it is for the vendors that are doing it on our side, it's just as easy for the malicious actors to be doing it. So.
Yeah, one of our forensic tools that we use has recently had an update where they're when you got AI within the tool. I'm like, I don't think I'm actually going to try it. I should try it just to see what it does, but I wouldn't rely on it for anything essentially. I've done some testing with ChatGPT and given it some artifacts in the past to parse and be like, what do you think this does? And then it will say something, and then when I check the actual help file for the actual file or the documentation for it, it's completely opposite to what ChatGPT has said. So I wouldn't rely on it for analysis.
No, I wouldn't either. I had someone drop a encoded base64 string into it, and it just hallucinated the response to a point where it made absolutely zero sense. And we passed it back through CyberChef, and hey, there it is. So it was I think they did it as a gimmick, just to see what it would do. But at that point, I told my team, no. Even in our private instance, no. For things like that, you still use the known tools. Look, in some tooling, it's great, but it is contributing to a massive increase in sophistication of phishing attacks, and we see that from what we're triaging daily for clients as well. It also helps with targeted campaigns as well. Mindful of time, I'm going to jump onto our last topic here as well. This one, instead of looking at a vulnerability of the week, because there were too many to choose from, we're looking at the 2024 Midyear Threat Landscape Review from our friends over at Qualys. I find this one, being a SOC manager, I find this really, really interesting. So what they've found in the threat landscape review, it provides an overview of the evolving threat landscape, highlighting the cybersecurity trends and challenges observed in the first half of the year. And I mean, the thing that really caught me was ransomware incidents accounted for 40% of all cyber attacks in the first half of 2024. Now, it's a little bit unclear in the article where that data came from, if that's US-centric or if it's worldwide. It's a pretty broad statement to say 40% of all cyber attacks worldwide, so I don't know where that's come from. I can't attribute that. And then they said there was a 30% increase in ransomware attacks compared to 2023. So, mate, can you walk us through the rest of this? Because I find it, I know what's out there and I know what we're seeing in our client environments and things like that, but to people who aren't running vulnerability scans across tens of thousands of assets and comparing them across client bases, I think this is something worth really digging into.
Yeah, they've sort of on the ransomware side, they've also talked about the double and triple extortion. So we already discussed the double extortion side of things. I'll just touch briefly on the triple, which is we're actually seeing a bit of an increase in this as well, where threat actors will also make phone calls to victim organizations. So we've seen instances where they will work their way through everyone that's listed on the C-suite, basically ringing up saying, "Hey, this is me. We've got your data. You need to pay it." So we are seeing an increase in that as well from organizations that we help respond to ransomware attacks.
On that, didn't I see recently that they reached out to employees or even customers of organizations, and this isn't anyone we dealt with, but I've seen reports where they've reached out to employees and customers to say, hey, we've ransomware this organization, you need to convince them to pay or all your data's getting leaked.
Yeah, we've definitely had instances where employees have had calls from the threat actor or someone purporting to be the threat actor. But the threat to contact the clients, that does happen. Like we see them threaten it a lot. I haven't had any reports personally of where the threat actors followed up on that, or that the client's known about anyway.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
maybe they've got emails and they've just deleted it because
That's it.
yeah.
I'll see if I can find the article. I think it was about 6 months ago I read an article about it, so I might be talking out of school, but I do remember reading something back then about that one, which
I wouldn't
blew
be
me away.
surprised if some threat actors are doing it, to be honest. Yeah.
Cool. The other one, obviously, we've just touched is phishing and social engineering. Walk us through that one.
Yes. So essentially, in the report, they're talking about how phishing attacks have surged by 45% in 2024, with over 60% of these attacks utilizing AI-generated content to appear more legitimate and increase effectiveness. I think we're just talking about that just then.
And the previous article said a 40% increase. So, that's two different sources that are reporting that increase. So I'd put some weight behind that. And it definitely lines up with how much time my team is spending triaging phishing emails as well.
Yeah. And also these targeted campaigns are increasingly exploiting current events to deceive victims. So again, purporting to be from CrowdStrike or something to do with the Olympics.
Yep. Or AnyDesk, Microsoft,
or
any of
AnyDesk,
those.
Microsoft. Yeah. We actually had two instances of that in the last, I think it was last week actually, or the week before, where two people reported the fake blue screen from Microsoft saying you need to ring this number. Unfortunately, in one of those cases, it was followed through, and the victim did go through that process, and fortunately, the other saw it for what it was and a scam, and got it sorted. So it is very common.
Man, I honestly thought we were past pop-up scams.
From what I've heard and talking to both of the clients is it seems like they were browsing, I think it was MSN, and I could be completely wrong, but from memory it's like MSN News or something like that. So what I would probably think is more likely is that threat actors are becoming a bit more efficient about how they're trying to inject these pop-ups.
Malicious ads. Yep.
Yep.
That's always frightening, right? The amount of, I was on news.com today and just on my phone, and there's a picture of Guy Sebastian with a junky header, and in all honesty, it looks like one of those malicious ads, or it looks like a clickbaity ad, and I'm like, it's news.com, right? It's not the best news website, but it's a legitimate news website, and they have got the worst, most fishy looking ad right front and center on multiple pages, and I'm like, come on guys, you can do better. So I think you're right, the malicious actors are definitely getting better at being able to get those sorts of malicious ads in there.
One of the
cloud security.
Cloud security. They said the report sort of discusses how there's been a 25% increase in cloud-related vulnerabilities, with misconfigurations being the leading cause of cloud security incidents. The accelerated shift to cloud services has made cloud environments a significant target for attackers, emphasizing the need for stronger cloud security practices.
100% agree.
Yes.
Cloud risk, you're just using someone else's machine, right? You're relying on them to have the correct configurations. Really happy to see recently there was a release that Microsoft are now going to be reporting this sort of thing as I disagree, they don't need to be a vulnerability, a CVE, but they should at least be reported as something within the platform that us as the end users need to be aware of. whether we need to take action or not, at least we can look at it through the landscape of our risk acceptance and go, okay, we don't need to worry about that, or depending on what was exposed, yes, we do need to worry about what was happening. So I think that's going to be a massive area for vulnerability increase in the future.
Agreed. We see a lot of cloud-related incidents. Always AWS keys is a significant factor.
If you're not rotating your AWS keys, just go home.
Yeah, make sure they're not hard-coded in anything as well.
Well, if you rotate them, it means if they're hard-coded, they're going to fail, right? At least you'll be able to find them.
I mean, there are actually a lot of, I guess, advantages to responding to incidents in the cloud as well, is because we actually find that most of the time there's some kind of backup mechanism in place, which is obviously really good to recover from incidents where you need to, i.e. systems have been encrypted. But it's also really good for evidence collection as well. So we've had a number of wins where we've been able to go back to backups of a specific machine or server at a specific point in time, which has allowed us to collect evidence that otherwise we wouldn't have been able to. So from that perspective, it's quite good. But yeah, just making sure that you just because something's in the cloud, people sometimes think that it's just secure, but there's a lot of complexity involved in making sure things are secure in there. And maybe complexity is not the right word, but it's not just securing a normal machine. There's a lot of configuration that you can do within these platforms to make sure things are secure.
Yep. Exactly. And I mean, you take Azure, for instance. I'll go looking for a menu option 3 months later and it's moved. It's on a completely different screen, or it's under a completely new heading. It is really tough to keep. Yeah, exactly. So it's really tough to keep on track of this sort of stuff. And I know when I used to manage AWS and deal with stuff in there as well, it was tough at times. So it is critically important. And again, there is vulnerability scanning for these sorts of things. These tools have actually got some really good recommendations built into them now around where you meet their recommended requirements as well. So if you're not looking at that, you're not paying attention to it and building uplift, we recommend it. Obviously, we offer services around that, but of course we recommend it because we don't want you having to call Richard's team and be doing default work. So all right, mate. Which one do you want to jump onto there? You've got a choice of 3. You've got supply chain attacks, a rise in 0 days, or a focus on critical infrastructure.
I think supply chain attacks is a good one as well. So in the report, Qualys has said that the supply chain attacks have risen 50%, with most of these attacks targeting software vendors or third-party service providers. Yeah, I mean, we've actually seen some instances of this in DFR as well, where a breach within a service provider has resulted in downstream breaches of their clients as well. There's been a couple of different ways that's done, whether it's through remote management software or through access to cloud service hosting platforms as well. But it is quite prevalent from what we're seeing in DFR as well, and apparently as well from what Qualys is seeing as well as in the report.
Yeah, and I know that there's within the ADI landscape, APRA regulated organizations, there is requirements coming in around third-party vendors and being a lot more vigilant around those organizations as well. So I don't think it's just an us and Qualys thing. I expect that a much larger focus on supply chain coming across the board for Australian organizations in the future.
Yeah. It's important to understand, like, for example, if you've got an IT service provider that, say they use Screen Connect, for example, for managing your fleet, your servers and everything, and this is sort of the third-party risk assessment and things like that, is how do they secure that Screen Connect? Have they got that locked down to certain IPs? Have they enforced MFA across all the accounts? Are they auditing access to that platform? It's all very important things that you should be considering if you're in a position where you have third-party software like this installed.
Completely agree. And look, hand to heart, I would much rather see a client with Screen Connect than a client with a Terra or Splashtop, because at least Screen Connect, I can get the instance ID from the third party, and I can know that that's the trusted install, right? So they have to compromise their Screen Connect console to be able to do anything. A Terra and Splashtop, I don't have that option, right? There isn't that mechanism there. So it just goes out there. We trust the install path. We talk to the vendor and we go, yeah, that's, they go, oh yeah, that's ours, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, awesome, great. There is absolutely nothing saying that someone hasn't been able to pop a machine and install the Terra because it installs to the same path, and all of a sudden someone's got remote access and we can't tell that it's a different installation, or it hasn't been installed over the existing installation. So, we always bag Screen Connect, but at least for that, it's got the instance ID. I'd rather see that in an environment than some of the others out there.
And we've seen exactly that in DFR, what you described there, where the MSP used a specific product for it, and then the threat actors, like, I don't know whether it was just coincidence or they actually looked into it, but they installed the exact same product as well. So when the MSP became aware of the incident and they started doing remediation, they removed all this other stuff, but they left that RMM tool because they're like, well, that's what we use. But it's also,
and they didn't know it wasn't their instance. Damn, I didn't know about that. Look, I mean, I hate those tools. We're at the point where in our SIEM solutions, a Terra, Splashtop, and there's a couple of others, if they're installed, they're flagged as a malicious hash, right? Like CrowdStrike blocks it, and CrowdStrike's blocking it for a Defender. The EDR tools are blocking these things for a reason. So if your MSP is using these, have a chat with them. Yes, there's going to be a cost involved, right? They're cheap for a reason. Screen Connect at least gives you a lot more comfort that that's a trusted install. Sorry, a little bit of a rant from me there. I was hoping not to have one today, but I have. All right, mate, critical infrastructure. We're starting to do more and more in this area, and I know you guys are as well. So again, what are they seeing in this one?
Yes, they're seeing attacks on critical infrastructure have grown by 35%, with the energy and healthcare sectors being the most targeted. And essentially that those sectors are, because they're facing these, uptick in attacks, there's sort of that need for them to make sure that they've got enhanced security measures and regulatory compliance processes in place as well.
Yep, definitely. I mean, it just makes sense, right? And look, there's the critical infrastructure bill, and there's a whole heap of other things changing around there as well. So I expect to see, and I've seen some stuff that they expect attacks on critical infrastructure and IoT specifically to go through the roof. I used to work in power generation and mining. I remember the days where I used to be able to log into a console and be able to see power output of every power station in Western Australia. I used to be able to see at a very granular level what was connected, and I wasn't in a position where I should have been able to see that. I was in procurement. So, it is quite daunting to think that that's 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Did
you have the on-off button as well?
No.
Did you turn stuff off?
Oh, man, because that'd be scary. Southwest Interconnected Grid. But no, look, that, I cast my mind back then. I go, geez, that was scary then. And I know things have changed now, but there are still a lot of these hard-coded infrastructure type things that are out there that they just can't do anything with. So I expect to see this happening more and more, especially building management, infrastructure management, all that sort of thing.
And I think a lot of this as well is that these critical infrastructures organizations, they, a lot of the time, and we see this in healthcare, and a variety of other industries as well, is they'll have some old legacy program that like they can't get rid of. Like they absolutely need it. It's business critical. It's running on Windows Server 2000, and there's just no upgrade path. You know,
Mate,
whether that's a financial
I remember,
thing or
yeah, or vendor. I remember some of the original MRI machines, and I'm talking, you know, back when MRI machines are still expensive, right? But 2016, 2017, when we first started deploying SOC into a hospital, we were seeing XP machines running MRI machines. And they were perfectly upfront then that there was no upgrade path. There was no way these things would ever be upgraded until the MRI machine reaches end of life and they go and buy a new one.
Yeah.
So you think about how many of those are out there. You know, your airport security scanners, you know, a lot of them are basically running on the same sort of thing. There's a lot of that out there that if there's no upgrade path, then the organizations are stuck because their vendors are holding them to ransom. So scary. Anyway, as we do more and more in that field, I'm assuming we're going to start talking about that more as well, which I'm looking forward to. So excellent. Look, that's all we've got for this for our return. It's been a little bit of a longer episode today, but I hope you enjoyed it. And as always, if you've got any feedback or you'd like to hear us discuss something in particular, please reach out either on LinkedIn directly to either Richard or myself, our email address at tlblue@triskelllabs.com, or if you're a client, mention it to your account manager, and they'll have a chat with us as well. That's all I've got. And Richard, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Brad. And thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thanks all. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time. Thank you.
Thanks.